The stars looked different from this part of space. John Miller pressed his hand against the cold glass of the observation deck, watching as the U.S. horizon slipped into orbit around the massive gas giant. Its swirling storms reminded him of Jupiter, but the deep purple color was unlike anything in Earth's solar system. "Dr. Miller to the bridge." The announcement echoed through the ship's corridors. John straightened his uniform and hurried through the passageways. Captain Alan Wright looked up as John entered the bridge. "Our sensors picked up something unusual on the third moon. Energy readings that don't match natural formations." John looked at the display. The small rocky moon appeared lifeless, yet the scanner showed a faint power signature beneath its surface. "Could be worth checking out," John said. As the ship's senior xenobiologist, anything potentially alien fell under his responsibilities. Hours later, John stood with 5 other crew members on the moon's dusty surface. Their boots left clear prints in the fine gray dust that covered everything. "The signal's coming from below us," said Susan Carter, the team's diplomat. She adjusted her scanner. "About 50 meters down." Engineer Jeff Brown ran his equipment over a flat section of rock. "There's a door here, hidden, but definitely artificial." It took them nearly an hour to find the opening mechanism. When the door finally slid open, stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of something like ocean salt. "Breathable atmosphere," announced Lisa Grant, checking her instruments. "Stable temperature, too." The team descended a long ramp into darkness. Their lights revealed smooth corridors that seemed designed for beings smaller than humans. The walls shimmered with a pearly finish that reflected their beams in gentle rainbows. "This is incredible," Susan whispered, touching one wall carefully. "This isn't like any material I've seen before." They followed the main corridor until it opened into a vast chamber. John stopped in his tracks, mouth falling open. "Oh my God," he said softly. The chamber stretched farther than their lights could reach. But what made them freeze was what filled the space. Thousands of transparent pods, each glowing with a soft blue light. Inside each pod floated what looked like a cross between Earth's axolotls and jellyfish, small creatures with translucent bodies that pulsed gently with inner light. "They're alive," Lisa said, checking her scanner. "All of them, in some kind of suspended animation." John approached the nearest pod. The creature inside was no larger than his forearm, with delicate tendrils that moved slightly in the fluid. Its head had large, almond-shaped eyes that were closed as if in sleep. "This is a preservation facility," he realized. They put themselves in stasis. While the others explored the room, Susan found a control panel. When she touched it, screens lit up with symbols none of them recognized. But one image appeared clear enough. A distress signal, repeating endlessly into space. "Captain, you need to see this," she called over the comm. "The translation program is starting to make sense of their records. These beings, they call themselves the Lumini. They were dying out. Some kind of disease was killing them. This facility was their last hope." John moved from pod to pod, examining the inhabitants. "They're not all the same. Different ages, I think, even some very small ones. Children, maybe." Susan's voice grew quiet. "According to these logs, they sent distress calls to 3 different advanced species. All received the signal. All ignored it." The team fell silent, letting that sink in. "But why?" asked Jeff. Frank Martinez, who had been silent until now, pointed to another screen. "Resources. These creatures need very specific conditions to survive. The other species must have decided they weren't worth the effort." A sudden alarm blared through the chamber. One of the pods near John began flashing red. "Stasis failure," Lisa shouted, rushing toward it. "The pod is breaking down." John didn't hesitate. "We need to open it. If the stasis chemicals mix wrong, it could kill the occupant." Captain Wright's voice came over the comm. "That's against protocol, Dr. Miller. We don't have authorization for first contact." John placed his hands on the pod. "With respect, Captain, we don't have time for protocols. This being will die if we do nothing. After a tense pause, Wright spoke. Do what you have to do, Doctor. The team worked quickly, figuring out the pod's release mechanism. When it finally opened, the small creature inside floated in the liquid, its tendrils moving weakly. Susan approached carefully. Hello, she said softly. We're here to help. The creature's eyes opened, large, curious eyes with pupils like swirling galaxies. It looked at each human in turn, then focused on Susan. She gasped suddenly, putting a hand to her head. It's communicating, she whispered. Not words. Images. Feelings. She looked at the others with wonder in her eyes. Its name is Iria, and it's asking why we came when all others turned away. The news about the Lumini reached Earth faster than anyone expected. Within days, the entire planet was talking about the strange creatures found in stasis pods on a distant moon. Dr. Karen Nelson stood before the Earth Security Council, her hand steady as she pointed to the images on the large screen behind her. These beings are unique in the galaxy, she said. Their neural structure suggests remarkable intelligence. Their telepathic abilities could teach us things we've never imagined. But most importantly, they need our help to survive. From the other side of the chamber, Dr. Peter Jones frowned. With all respect to Dr. Nelson, we must consider the larger picture. Why did 3 advanced species choose to ignore their distress signal? What do they know that we don't? The council chamber erupted in heated debate. Some argued for immediate aid to the Lumini, while others warned of unknown risks. Meanwhile, aboard the U.S. Horizon, Lisa Grant worked day and night in the ship's lab. She had set up a special tank for Iria, filled with water that matched the chemical makeup of the stasis fluid. Amazing, she whispered, watching as a small cut on one of Iria's tendrils healed before her eyes. Their regenerative abilities are unlike anything I've seen before. Iria floated to the glass, placing a delicate tendril against it. Lisa felt a gentle touch in her mind. Not words exactly, but clear impressions. Gratitude, hope, fear. We're trying to help your people, Lisa said softly. But my leaders are still deciding what to do. In the ship's engine room, Frank Martinez cursed as a power coupling sparked near his face. The ship had been running non-stop scans of the facility, putting strain on the systems. Hand me that wrench, he called to his assistant. No response came. Frank turned, finding himself alone. Great, he muttered. As he reached for the tool himself, a strange feeling came over him, a sudden urge to step back. Frank froze, then jumped away just as the coupling exploded, sending metal shards flying through the space where he had been standing. What the hell? He gasped, heart pounding. A gentle ripple of concern touched his mind. Frank looked up to see Iria in a transport tank near the doorway, its tendrils waving frantically. The security officer who had been escorting the Lumini through the ship looked equally surprised. It was agitated suddenly and insisted we come this way, the officer explained. It saved you. Back on Earth, journalist Olivia Benson sat in a dark office, reviewing classified files that had been leaked to her. Her eyes widened as she read the translations of intercepted alien communications. Species classified as evolutionarily unviable. Resource requirements exceed potential contributions to galactic community. Recommended non-intervention policy. She looked at the images of the Lumini attached to the file. They left you to die because they didn't think you were useful enough, she whispered, anger rising in her chest. The story broke worldwide the next morning. Protests erupted outside government buildings across Earth. People carried signs reading, "Humanity is TNDs with DDGLUMINI," and "Who decides, who DZRV to LIV." In the council chamber, Admiral Greg Patterson slammed his hand on the table. The decision is made. We are going forward with the rescue operation. If we turn our backs on these beings, knowing what we know now, what does that make us? Dr. Jones shook his head. You're making a mistake. The Vectans, Araxians, and Medusans are centuries ahead of us technologically. They deliberately chose not to intervene. We risked their displeasure. Admiral Patterson's face hardened. Then let them be displeased. Some principles matter more than political convenience. Operation Sanctuary begins tomorrow. On the horizon, Captain Wright received the orders with relief. He had already decided to help the Lumini, with or without official approval. When he shared the news with the crew, cheers echoed through the ship. Susan Carter sat beside Iria's tank, attempting to explain what was happening through a mix of simple words and mental images. "We're going to help all of your people," she said. "We won't leave you behind." Iria's body glowed with pulses of blue light. Into Susan's mind came images of stars, of hands reaching out across space, of light emerging from darkness. The meaning was clear. Hope had come when all hope was lost. What neither human nor Lumini knew was that across the galaxy, 3 powerful civilizations were already discussing how to respond to humanity's interference. And they were not pleased. 3 ships hung in space near the moon where the Lumini slept. The U.S. horizon was now joined by the medical vessel U.S. Asclepius and the scientific research vessel U.S. Curie. Together, they formed the core of Operation Sanctuary. Admiral Grace Hoffman stood on the bridge of the Asclepius, watching a shuttlecraft move between the ships and the moon's surface. At 62 years old, she had seen many strange things in space, but nothing like this mission. "Status report," she called to her officers. "We've set up the first habitat tanks on the Curie," replied Lieutenant Sam West. "Chief Engineer Powell says they're ready for the first group of Lumini." Admiral Hoffman nodded. "And the awakening process?" "Dr. Summers has developed a protocol based on what we learned from Iria. It's still risky, but our chances of success are up to 80%. On the moon below, Daniel Powell wiped sweat from his forehead as he adjusted the settings on a massive tank. Creating the right environment for the Lumini had been his greatest challenge. They needed water with precise mineral content, specific pressure levels, and light that mimicked their homeworld. "How's it looking?" asked Dr. Eric Summers, entering the temporary lab they had set up near the stasis chamber. "I think we've got it," Daniel replied. "The terraforming tech wasn't designed for this, but with some creative adjustments, it's working." They both turned as a team of technicians carefully brought in the first stasis pod for awakening. Inside, a Lumini slightly larger than Iria floated peacefully, unaware that its fate now rested in human hands. "Here we go," Eric said quietly. "First official awakening." The process was delicate. Too fast, and the shock would kill the Lumini. Too slow, and the transition from stasis chemicals to water would poison them. The team watched in tense silence as the pod was connected to the larger tank. A red alarm suddenly blared. "Blood pressure dropping," shouted one of the medical techs. "We're losing it." Eric rushed forward, checking readings and adjusting settings. Nothing worked. The Lumini's life signs continued to fade. From the doorway, a voice called out, "Let me try something." Heather Williams, a nurse who had been working with Iria, pushed her way to the tank. "Iria showed me something yesterday. A neural connection might stabilize them." "That's too dangerous," Eric protested. "We don't know enough about their telepathic abilities." "There's no time to argue," Heather said, already placing her hands on the tank. "Iria, help me." The smaller Lumini, who had been watching from a portable tank, extended its tendrils toward Heather. A strange glow passed between them. Heather gasped, her eyes widening. She began to tremble, but kept her hands firmly on the tank. "I can feel them," she whispered. So scared, so confused. The team watched in amazement as the larger Lumini's vital signs slowly stabilized. Its color changed from pale gray to a healthier blue. Heather continued to shake, but a smile spread across her face. "They understand now," she said softly. "They know we're helping." When she finally stepped back, Heather nearly collapsed. But the newly awakened Lumini was stable, its tendrils moving curiously in the water. "What happened to you?" Eric asked, helping Heather to a chair. She looked up, her eyes somehow different, deeper, with tiny flecks of blue that hadn't been there before. We're connected now. I can feel them. Here. She touched her chest. And they can feel me. Over the next 2 weeks, more Lumini were awakened. Each time, a human volunteer formed a connection with them, guiding them safely into their new reality. Each time, both human and Lumini were changed by the experience. Through these bonds, the humans learned the Lumini's tragic history. They had once been a proud, peaceful species. When the genetic disease began spreading, they reached out to other advanced civilizations for help. All had the technology to save them. All refused. Not worth the resources, the Vectans had told them. Unfortunate, but natural selection at work, the Araxians had said. Your environmental needs are too specific, the Medusans had explained. So the remaining healthy Lumini built their last refuge and went into stasis, hoping that someday, someone would answer their call. Someone did. Iria communicated to Susan as they watched another successful awakening. When all others turned away, humans came. What none of them realized was that their success was being closely monitored. In distant parts of the galaxy, powerful beings were already making plans to stop what they saw as dangerous human interference. Ambassador Nicole Hartman had never felt so small. The Galactic Congress Chamber was designed to intimidate, with its massive dome that showed the stars beyond and seats arranged in rising tiers. Representatives from 15 spacefaring species looked down at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Humans have overstepped, said the Vectan representative, Zoltaran. His tall, slender body towered over Nicole even when seated. His skin shimmered with metallic blue scales. The Lumini were assessed and deemed unviable over 60 years ago. This decision was unanimous among the senior council. Nicole stood straighter. With respect, no one invited humanity to this assessment. We found beings in need, and we chose to help them. A murmur ran through the chamber. The Araxian representative, a bulky creature with 4 arms and eyes that glowed orange, leaned forward. Your species is young. You cannot understand the complex balance of galactic ecology. Some species simply cannot be sustained. The Lumini are thriving under our care, Nicole replied. Already over 300 have been awakened successfully. Sentimental primitives, Zoltaran said dismissively. You waste resources that could be better utilized elsewhere. Back on the Asclepius, Security Chief Rick Simmons frowned at his screen. Something wasn't right. He had noticed small discrepancies in the supply inventory over the past week. Items missing, but not enough to trigger automatic alerts. Computer, show me security footage of cargo bay 3 from yesterday, he ordered. The screen displayed the large storage area. For several minutes, nothing seemed unusual. Then Rick noticed a technician he didn't recognize entering the room. The man moved efficiently, taking a small container from a shelf and hiding it inside his uniform before leaving. Rick froze the image and enhanced it. Run facial recognition. No match found in crew database, the computer replied. Rick's blood ran cold. We have an infiltrator, he whispered, immediately calling the bridge. Within hours, the imposter was caught. Under questioning, he revealed himself as an agent of the Araxian Dominion, sent to prevent humanity's mistake from continuing. The container he had stolen contained a toxin designed to contaminate the Lumini habitats. On the research vessel Curie, Dr. Philip Warren made a discovery that changed everything. He had been studying the disease that had nearly wiped out the Lumini, trying to understand its progression. This isn't natural, he said to Admiral Hoffman, as they looked at the genetic analysis. The markers are too precise, the spread pattern too efficient. This disease was engineered. Hoffman stared at him. Are you saying someone tried to eliminate the Lumini on purpose? Not tried. Almost succeeded. Philip pointed to a specific genetic sequence. This is a signature. We've seen it before in bioweapons attributed to the Medusan collective. Across the gulf of space, aboard the diplomatic vessel Concord, Nicole Hartman sat across from representatives of the three major powers. The evidence of the engineered disease had been transmitted to her just hours earlier. "You didn't just abandon them," she said, her voice steady despite her anger. "You tried to kill them." None of the aliens denied it. The Medusan representative, a being that resembled a floating jellyfish with multiple eyes, simply pulsed with different colors. Their world contained resources valuable to our development. It communicated telepathically. Their environmental needs made shared occupation impossible. Zoltaran of the Vectans leaned forward. "You are too young a species to understand the necessities of galactic stability. Some decisions are unfortunate but required." "Required?" Nicole's voice shook. "Genocide is required." "Choose your path carefully, Ambassador," Zoltaran said softly. "Humanity is new to the stars. New species can also be found inconvenient." The threat hung in the air between them. Nicole realized with sudden clarity that this was no longer just about the Lumini. The major powers were sending a message: conform to our ways or face the consequences. As she left the meeting, Nicole received an urgent communication from Earth. President Laura Hughes herself appeared on the screen, her face grave. "Ambassador, a Vectan fleet has been detected moving toward our solar system. They claim it's just a routine patrol, but our intelligence suggests otherwise." Nicole closed her eyes briefly. "They're trying to intimidate us into abandoning the Lumini." "Will it work?" the president asked. Nicole thought of the Lumini she had met, their gentle telepathic touches filled with gratitude and hope. She remembered the stories they had shared of other species who had mysteriously vanished over the centuries. "No," she said firmly. "Humanity will not be intimidated into becoming what we despise." Dr. Julia Bennett sat cross-legged on the floor of the lab, surrounded by screens displaying brain wave patterns. Across from her, 3 Lumini floated in a large tank, their tendrils moving in a synchronized dance. "Let's try again," Julia said softly. "Carlos, think of a memory. Something clear and specific." Lieutenant Carlos Diaz closed his eyes. He pictured his childhood home in New Mexico, the smell of his grandmother's cooking, the feel of the warm adobe walls. The Lumini's bodies pulsed with light. A moment later, Julia gasped. "The desert. I can see it perfectly," she whispered. "The red rocks, the cactus flowers. I can even smell the chili peppers." Carlos opened his eyes in shock. "That's exactly what I was thinking." This was the breakthrough Julia had been working toward for weeks. The Lumini weren't simply telepathic. They could create perfect transfers of concepts, memories, and ideas between minds. Distance didn't matter. Language barriers disappeared completely. Commander Scott Wilson stood in the doorway, watching the experiment with growing excitement. As tactical officer for the mission, he immediately understood the implications. "This could change everything," he said when Julia reported her findings. "If the Lumini can transfer information this perfectly, they could revolutionize how we communicate across space." Admiral Hoffman listened carefully to Julia's report. "So they're not just refugees. They're potentially the most valuable allies we could have found." "Exactly," Julia nodded. "Any species with Lumini assistance would have perfect communication. No misunderstandings. No translation errors, instant transfer of complex ideas across any distance. And if one side had this advantage in diplomacy or war," Hoffman's voice trailed off, "they'd be nearly unstoppable," Commander Wilson finished. On Earth, President Laura Hughes stood before the United Nations General Assembly. The chamber was packed, with delegates from every nation present. Screens around the hall displayed the Vectan fleet, now positioned just beyond Mars. "Today, we face a choice that will define humanity's place among the stars," she began. "We have been warned to abandon the Lumini or face consequences. We have been told that our compassion is weakness, that some lives are not worth saving." She paused, looking around the room. "I reject this notion completely. Earth will establish new lumina, a protected territory in our solar system where these beings can rebuild their civilization under human protection. We will not bend to threats. We will not abandon those who need us. The chamber erupted in applause. Despite the fear, despite the risk, humanity had made its choice. On the Asclepius, Iria, and the other awakened Lumini elders gathered in a special chamber. Through their human partners, they shared their true history with Admiral Hoffman and her senior staff. We were not always weak, Iria communicated through Susan Carter. Our civilization was ancient when the Vectans first achieved spaceflight. We were peaceful explorers, cataloging the wonders of the galaxy. Images flowed into the humans' minds. Beautiful underwater cities, ships that sailed between stars like silverfish, encounters with dozens of young species. But we discovered something the major powers wanted hidden. Another elder named Maury shared through his human partner evidence of their systematic elimination of species they found inconvenient. The Lumini projected memories of worlds stripped bare, of civilizations that vanished suddenly, of engineered diseases that targeted specific species. We preserved this evidence, hoping that someday someone would help us bring justice. Admiral Hoffman's face was grim. That's why they tried to eliminate you. Not just for your resources, but because you knew too much. Iria's body glowed with a sad blue light. We are the witnesses they could not silence. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Hoffman stared at the approaching Vectan vessels on the screen. Earth had some defenses, but nothing that could match the technology of a civilization centuries more advanced. It seems we've stumbled into something much bigger than a rescue mission, she said quietly to Captain Wright. The question is, what do we do now? Wright looked at the screen showing the Lumini habitat, where hundreds of the once doomed species now thrived under human care. We stand our ground, he said firmly. It's what makes us human. #abandoned by all. Only humanity stood by this helpless species. Part 6. Diplomatic warfare. Admiral Hoffman stood in the war room of the U.S. Asclepius, surrounded by her top officers. The screens showed the Vectan fleet, now holding position just beyond Mars. We can't win a direct fight, she said plainly. But there are other ways to wage war. She brought up a new display showing trade routes across the galaxy. Operation Lighthouse begins now. Earth is becoming an important hub for 12 smaller civilizations. We leverage that. Ambassador Hartman worked tirelessly from the diplomatic vessel Concord. Within days, she had contacted representatives from species that existed in the shadow of the three major powers, civilizations that had their own reasons to fear the Vectans, Araxians, and Medusans. We're forming a coalition of emerging species, she explained to a reptilian diplomat from Suriname. United, our voices become stronger. The major powers will not be pleased, the diplomat replied, scales flickering with anxiety. Nichols smiled. That's rather the point. On the Curie, Dr. Bennett worked with a team of Lumini specialists to develop something revolutionary. They called them clarity nodes. Communication devices powered by volunteering Lumini that allowed instant, perfect understanding between different species. Try it, she urged a group of diplomats who had arrived from various worlds. Each placed a small device behind their ear. A Lumini named Zila floated in a central tank, its tendrils connecting to the system. When the diplomats began speaking, each in their native language, they suddenly froze in amazement. I understand all of you, said the Saran diplomat. Not just words, but cultural context, emotional meaning, everything. Within weeks, clarity nodes became the most sought-after technology in the sector. Smaller civilizations, tired of misunderstandings and translation errors that had caused countless conflicts, eagerly adopted the devices. Trade negotiations that once took months now concluded in days. The Vectans attempted to isolate Earth through a trade embargo, but the effort backfired spectacularly. Smaller worlds, now connected through perfect communication, filled the gaps in supply chains with unprecedented efficiency. Engineer Powell worked with Lumini technicians to develop another breakthrough, FTL communication that bypassed the relay networks controlled by the major powers. For the first time, emerging civilizations could communicate freely without monitoring. The Araxian Dominion was the first to break ranks. Always pragmatic, they recognized the shifting balance of power. "We offer formal recognition of Lumini sovereignty," their representative announced, in exchange for limited access to their communication abilities. The crack in the once united front sent shockwaves through galactic politics. Steve Anderson, Earth's newly appointed Minister of Galactic Affairs, seized the moment. Using the Clarity network that now connected 12 civilizations directly to Earth, he simultaneously released all evidence the Lumini had preserved, centuries of documented genocide and biological warfare. "These aren't isolated incidents," his message concluded. "This is systematic elimination of species deemed inconvenient." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Smaller worlds that had lost colonies or neighboring civilizations suddenly had answers to mysteries centuries old. Trade with the Medusan collective collapsed overnight as dozens of worlds joined an impromptu boycott. Aboard the Vectan flagship, Zol Terran received increasingly disturbing reports. "How are the humans doing this?" he demanded. "They have no military power that threatens us, yet they've turned half the sector against us in weeks." His eyes' metallic scales dulled with stress. "They're fighting with information and connection, not weapons. And the Lumini, their abilities are far greater than our assessments indicated." Zol Terran stared at the screen showing Earth's growing influence. "We could still destroy them," he said coldly. "One decisive strike." "But not without consequences," the aide replied. "For the first time, the younger species are united. An attack on Earth would trigger responses from dozens of worlds." On the Concorde, Ambassador Hartman received an unexpected communication request from the Vectan flagship. When Zol Terran's image appeared, she was surprised to see his usual arrogance replaced by cold calculation. "Your species has proven unexpectedly resourceful," he said. "Perhaps we should discuss terms." Hartman kept her expression neutral, though her heart raced with hope. "We're always open to diplomatic solutions. Our only non-negotiable condition is the continued protection of the Lumini." Zol Terran's scales shimmered with barely controlled frustration. "Agreed," he said finally. "But this conversation is not over." As the communication ended, Hartman allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had stood its ground without firing a single shot. Sometimes, the strongest weapon was simply refusing to back down from what was right. 5 years passed like a blink of an eye. John Miller, now Admiral Miller, stood at the observation deck of New Lumina Station, watching the bustling activity in the large water habitats that formed the heart of the settlement. The Lumini population had grown to nearly 50,000. Their blue glow illuminated the massive water spheres that orbited Earth's moon, creating a sight that had become famous throughout the galaxy. The Sapphire Necklace, as poets called it. "Amazing how far we've come," said Susan Carter, joining him at the window. Her role as diplomat had expanded beyond anything she could have imagined. The small translator she once used had been replaced by a direct neural link with her Lumini partner, Iria. "Do you ever regret it?" John asked. "Standing up to species that could have destroyed us?" Susan smiled. "Not for a second." Below them, in the largest habitat sphere, a ceremony was beginning. Dr. Warren, whose genetic research had finally produced a cure for the engineered disease that nearly wiped out the Lumini, was being honored. The treatment had ensured the species' long-term survival, allowing them to thrive in their new home. "They're adapting," John noted, pointing to a group of younger Lumini. Their bodies were slightly different from the original population, more streamlined, with tendrils better suited to the currents in the engineered habitats. "Evolution in action," Susan agreed, "but the biggest changes haven't been physical." She was right. The most profound transformation had been in the relationship between humans and Lumini. The empathic bonds that began as emergency measures during the rescue had multiplied. Thousands of humans now shared permanent neural connections with Lumini partners. From these bonds, a new philosophy had emerged: collective individualism. The idea that beings could remain independent while sharing deep connections had spread rapidly through human culture, changing art, politics, and even family structures. On the diplomatic front, the changes were equally dramatic. The Galactic Congress had formally censured the three major powers for their actions against the Lumini and other species. Though largely symbolic, this represented a profound shift in the balance of power. The Vectans actually apologized yesterday, Susan said with amazement. Not publicly, of course, but their representative admitted to the council that their assessment of the Lumini was incomplete. High praise from them, John chuckled. A young officer approached them with a message. Admiral, the sanctuary is ready for inspection. John nodded, excitement building in his chest. The U.S. Sanctuary was humanity's first true diplomatic vessel, designed specifically for humanitarian missions. The massive ship incorporated both human and Lumini technology, and would be staffed by members of both species. Will you do the honors? He asked Susan. Together, they made their way to the launching bay where the gleaming ship waited. Its hull bore a new emblem: a human hand and Lumini tendril intertwined against a field of stars. As they boarded for inspection, John noticed an elderly Lumini waiting in a hover tank area, now an ambassador in her own right. Her body had grown paler with age, but her telepathic voice was as strong as ever when she greeted them. A beautiful ship, she communicated, built for a beautiful purpose. To find others who need help, John agreed. To be the response that should have come for your people. Later that day, Aria addressed a gathering of 37 species aboard the Galactic Congress station. Through a clarity node, her words reached trillions across the galaxy. My people faced extinction, she began, not from natural causes, but from the coldness of calculation. We were deemed without value. Our lives weighed against resources and found wanting. Her tendrils moved gracefully as she continued. But value cannot be calculated in minerals or military might. It lives in the courage to stand for those who cannot stand alone. In the willingness to risk much for what is right. On an observation deck away from the formal proceedings, a young human girl sat beside a young Lumini, both watching the stars through a large window. They were from the first generation born in freedom. The human with tiny blue flecks in her eyes, the Lumini with patterns that had never existed before the bond between their species. What will we do next? The young Lumini asked telepathically. The girl smiled, her mind sharing images of stars and worlds they might someday visit. Anything we want, she replied. Together.